Picture the scene. It's well after midnight in Seoul, pitch dark. The National Assembly building is surrounded by soldiers in full combat gear. Their orders are clear. This is martial law, and no one gets inside. This is the very image of a democracy ending. But then cars start pulling up. Lawmakers, men and women in suits, start streaming towards the building. And when the soldiers physically block them, they don't just go home, they argue, they push. Some of them, literal members of parliament, start climbing walls to get onto the grounds, shoving past soldiers who look, more than anything, just bewildered. This moment looks like absolute chaos. It looks like the start of a coup, or maybe the messy, undignified end of one. But what's truly remarkable about this image of politicians scaling a fence to get into their own parliament while soldiers just watch, confused, is that this wasn't the coup. This was the immune system kicking in. This was the antidote.
Welcome to this deep dive. And yeah, that opening scene is just incredible. Lawmakers literally having to breach their own perimeter. It really sets the stage perfectly.
It does.
We're diving into, well, arguably the most intense constitutional crisis South Korea has faced in decades. An attempted self-coup using martial law that was all over in just 6 hours.
6 hours. Still amazing.
The stakes were incredibly high, and yet the outcome was so swift, so decisive. You had a president removed, impeached successfully, and a completely new mandate delivered in only 6 months.
So our mission today is really to unpack that resilience, right? How did democracy fight back so fast?
Exactly. We want to get into the machinery of it. How did the structural safeguards, the legal bits work? How did technology play a role in real time? And crucially, how did this powerful, almost instinctive collective memory kick in to defeat this overreach so quickly?
That speed is, I think, what grabs everyone. Constitutional crises usually feel like slow burns, months, even years of erosion.
Right.
This was a flashpoint. 6 hours of intense, real-time crisis and somehow resolution. So let's walk through the timeline of those 6 hours.
Yeah.
Because the sequence, the order of events, seems absolutely critical here.
It really is. Everything kicked off late on December 3rd, 2024. The precise moment, the ignition point, was 10:27 p.m. Korea Standard Time.
Right then.
President Yoon Suk-yeol went on television, live broadcast, declaring a nationwide state of emergency martial law. And the language he used, it was clearly designed to manufacture an existential threat.
Oh, absolutely extreme. He was basically attacking the legitimacy of the entire legislature. He accused the main opposition, the DPK, of anti-state activities.
Right.
And linked them to North Korean communists. Even called the National Assembly a den of criminals. I mean, that's rhetoric designed to justify tearing down the whole democratic structure.
And that narrative, framing any opposition as essentially treasonous, it immediately set the stage for these sweeping restrictions. All political activity gone, the National Assembly itself shut down, political parties, public rallies, demonstrations, all prohibited.
And the media, too.
Media operations, everything, placed under the control of a new martial law command. It was a textbook executive power grab designed to freeze democracy instantly.
But for anyone in Korea, or anyone who follows Korea, hearing martial law, that phrase carries immense historical weight. It's not just legalese.
Not at all. It's deeply, intensely associated with the decades of dictatorship. It hadn't been imposed since, 1979, that whole period up to 81?
Right. Under the military regime.
So invoking it isn't just a political move. It's like reopening a national wound. And what's fascinating, maybe telling about this attempt is how, kind of poorly executed it seemed compared to those historical precedents.
How so? What deviated from the old authoritarian playbook?
Well, the past military regimes, like Park Chung-hee's, they understood rule number one. Control the information flow immediately.
Total blackout.
Exactly. Seize the broadcasting network, slap on a strict curfew, cut off communication channels. But this time, in December 2024, the government didn't manage to fully control the broadcasters. And crucially, they failed to restrict internet access or shut down social media. That suggests either a major miscalculation about how fast information moves now,
or just a surprising lack of planning.
Or maybe just sheer lack of coordination. Like they weren't actually fully prepared for the pushback involved in such a massive anti-constitutional move. And that failure, that technical gap, created the opening.
The opening the legislature needed for its counterstrike. Because they knew the Constitution gave them this one ultimate power.
The power to nullify martial law with a majority vote.
So, the race was on.
A mad dash, really. The counterstrike needed two things to happen. Lawmakers had to physically get to the assembly building.
Which was surrounded by troops.
Right. And they had to hold the vote before they could be arrested or blocked because police and military were already there, deployed specifically to stop the assembly from convening.
And reports suggest the plan included arresting key party leaders.
That seems to have been the intent, yes, to decapitate the opposition leadership before they could act.
Which brings us back to that incredible scene you painted at the start. Lawmakers, the speaker included, literally facing physical barriers and making that decision.
To climb the walls, shoving past soldiers who, by all accounts, just looked confused, bewildered, unsure what their orders actually meant in this situation.
It's such a bizarre image. Constitutional authority literally scaling a fence to overcome physical force.
And they were fast. Despite the chaos, the blockades, they got in. By 1:01 a.m., barely 2.5 hours after Yoon's declaration.
Just 2.5 hours.
The assembly convened, they hit quorum, and bam! Passed the resolution 190-0, demanding the martial law be lifted immediately.
190-0.
Yeah.
Unanimous. That speed, that unity,
Yeah.
It shows they knew the law, knew the stakes, knew they had to act decisively.
And then the system held.
Yep.
The law, as passed by the legislature, demanded compliance. And by 4:30 a.m., the president complied, issued a statement, honored the constitutional mandate, lifted the decree.
But you mentioned a crucial factor enabling that compliance, the military and police response.
Yes. Critically, they didn't just blindly follow the executive's orders down the chain of command.
Meaning there was resistance from within.
Passive resistance, certainly. Reports suggest field commanders deliberately slow-walked some of the more aggressive orders.
Buying time.
Buying precious minutes, yes. And maybe even more importantly, military judicial officers, the legal side of the military, repeatedly and quickly ruled the martial law declaration itself illegal.
So internal friction within the security apparatus.
Exactly. It created systemic friction. The president's attempt to impose absolute command just sort of fractured because key people remained loyal to the constitutional structure, not just the person issuing the orders.
So the immediate crisis fizzled in 6 hours. Bewildered soldiers, resistant commanders, wall-scaling lawmakers. But you argued the underlying reason it failed comes down to these 3 pillars of democratic resilience. Let's dig into the first one, that specific constitutional backstop.
Right. This is where we move from the high drama to the legal nuts and bolts. What's key here is that South Korea's resilience wasn't just about vague democratic feelings. It was anchored in very concrete, very specific law.
Article 77.
Article 77 of the Constitution. That's the mechanism.
And what makes Article 77 so precise, such a fail-safe?
It states that the president must comply immediately if the National Assembly, by majority vote, demands martial law be lifted. That word, must. It's not optional, it's not advisory.
It's an absolute legal requirement.
Binding. It creates this clear, non-negotiable path for resistance. It turns a potential political standoff into a straightforward legal command. The legislature just pulls the lever the Constitution provides, and the executive has zero legal ground to refuse.
That kind of clarity must act as a deterrent in itself, right?
Yeah.
If you know the assembly can just switch it off instantly.
It definitely raises the political cost, yes. And you mentioned the legal response earlier, that image of the Constitutional Court. When martial law was declared, they didn't panic.
They focused on the law.
Exactly. The institutional reaction was, well, clinical almost. The law was like a surgical tool. Think about the atmosphere inside the Constitutional Court right after the declaration. Once the assembly nullified it, that initial shock reportedly gave way to this intense scholarly focus on precedent.
They were looking back at the 2017 Park Geun-hye impeachment.
Immediately. Senior justices, their staff, they weren't guessing. They were pulling up the framework, the rulings, the procedures established just a few years prior. They were doing a high-speed constitutional audit.
Making sure the legal basis was unshakable.
Absolutely. They knew the nation's stability depended on their interpretation. They spent weeks digging into constitutional law, not looking for a political fix, but for a legally watertight one. Calculating the precise legal weight needed, the law became the real battleground.
There was that quote from a young legal staffer.
Yeah, describing the eventual unanimous ruling upholding the impeachment months later. He said it felt like hearing the heavy, satisfying click of a complex safety mechanism doing exactly what it was designed to do.
Wow, the Constitution as a pre-engineered defense.
That's what it was in this case. Not just paper, but a functioning machine against autocracy.
Okay, so that legal foundation, Article 77, is Pillar 1. But law needs enforcement, or at least popular backing, to work. Which brings us neatly to Pillar B, rapid civic mobilization, powered by digital infrastructure.
Right. Having Article 77 is one thing, but you still need the political will and, frankly, the physical bodies on the ground to protect the assembly while it does its work, to stop those arrests.
And that's where technology came in.
This is where the fusion of civic action and the digital age created a whole new layer of defense that past dictatorships simply didn't face. This crisis unfolded live on social media. Information spread instantly, completely bypassing the official narrative the martial law command was trying to impose.
The speed of information was the game changer. Who really sparked that digital counter-movement?
The opposition leader, Lee Jae-myung, understood the power of reach. He went straight to YouTube Live,
Bypassing official channels entirely.
completely beyond the martial law command's immediate control, and he used it to galvanize resistance. He urged people, citizens, to come to the National Assembly grounds, and he was direct about the threat. There's a very high possibility, he warned, that the military will be mobilized to arrest lawmakers.
It wasn't a press release, it was an urgent plea.
A direct call for help, cutting through the noise.
That immediacy. You get a notification on your phone and suddenly realize democracy might hinge on you actually showing up. Let's talk about that digital to physical response.
Okay, picture maybe a student, let's call her Sumin, in Seoul. It's late, she's maybe studying or scrolling. She sees that notification pop up.
Right.
Her university group chats, Kakao Talk, whatever, usually full of memes or class notes. Suddenly they explode into real-time coordination hubs.
Not debating, but organizing.
Exactly. People aren't arguing the legal points. They're sharing, meet here, avoid this road, police roadblock, here's the fastest subway route to Uido. Practical, immediate coordination.
From mundane chat to existential logistics in minutes.
And that digital buzz translated directly into bodies on the street. People showed extraordinary courage. They started arriving, physically blocking the paths of armored vehicles heading towards the assembly.
Forming human chains, literally.
Yes, creating that crucial delay. That collective action bought the National Assembly the time it needed, just enough time to convene and pass that nullification vote before the arrests could happen.
If the military had sealed the grounds and grabbed the leaders before 1:01 a.m.,
the whole thing might have gone the other way. It was the physical presence of citizens, organized digitally, that kept the constitutional process alive in those critical hours.
So the people bought the time, the Constitution provided the tool. But why did people react so fast, take such risks? That leads to Pillar C institutional memory as a national antibody.
Yes. That sense of urgency comes from deep historical trauma. Remember, many of those lawmakers rushing back, climbing the walls, they came of age protesting the military governments of the 70s and 80s.
They knew the script.
They knew exactly what martial law meant in practice. It wasn't an abstract threat. It meant the assembly dissolved, unchecked power, likely violence. They didn't need a briefing.
And that democratic spirit, it wasn't learned in school, it was forged in struggle. The Gwangju Uprising in 1980 being the most horrific example.
That history demands immediate action. It functions like a national antibody. The message is, you don't wait, you don't debate nuances, you resist the very first sign of authoritarianism because the cost of hesitation is catastrophic.
And this wasn't just the politicians, it was generational.
We saw this generational transfer of that urgency very clearly.
Tell us about that story from Gwangju.
Yeah, I read this account of Mr. Park, a restaurant owner in Gwangju. He lived through the 80s dictatorship. For him, Yoon's declaration on December 3rd wasn't just news, it was a flashback. The sound of boots, the smell of tear gas, that fear was immediate, visceral.
And he passed that feeling on.
He did. He called his son in Seoul. The son apparently was initially dismissive, thinking, oh, it's just political drama. The military won't really do anything in 2024.
Underestimating the historical echo.
Right. But Mr. Park was firm. He told him, you don't understand, you don't wait, you don't comply, you resist. This is how it starts. That direct transmission of lived experience. It jolted the younger generation, who'd only known democracy, into understanding the stakes instantly. That memory was the trigger.
So martial law is lifted by 4:30 a.m. But that's just Act 1 closing. The constitutional fallout was just beginning. Let's move into Part 3.
Yeah.
The impeachment, the arrest, the whole judicial aftermath.
Right. The immediate next step was accountability. An impeachment motion was filed almost instantly, and it passed just 10 days later, December 14th. The vote was substantial, 204 to 85.
And critically, some members of Yoon's own party voted for it.
About 12 members of the People Power Party broke ranks. That signals a huge internal collapse of support, driven heavily by public opinion.
Because the public mobilization and outrage put immense pressure on them. Yoon's approval ratings absolutely tanked, below the teens. Supporting him became politically radioactive, even for conservatives.
Then the legal pressure ramped up dramatically. Yoon wasn't just impeached, he was arrested, taken into custody on January 19th, and the charge was crucial: insurrection.
Insurrection, that's a heavy charge, not just political malpractice. Why that specific charge?
Because under the South Korean constitution, insurrection along with treason is one of the very few things that pierces presidential immunity. It allows for prosecution and even pretrial detention while still technically holding office, albeit suspended.
Was there precedent for charging a head of state with insurrection?
Yes. Importantly, this wasn't pulled out of thin air. There is a clear precedent from a 1997 Supreme Court ruling against leaders of a previous military regime. That ruling established that actions designed to overthrow or undermine the constitutional order qualify as insurrection.
And ordering the military to shut down parliament fit that definition.
According to the prosecutors and later the courts, yes. It showed the judiciary wasn't inventing law for political reasons. They were applying an existing high-level standard specifically designed for coup-like situations.
The seriousness was clear. Even the arrest itself was dramatic.
It really was. Reports described agents having to scale walls, use special gear to get into his residence to execute the warrant. A very visible demonstration that the rule of law applied forcefully even to the highest office.
Okay, so Yoon is suspended, under arrest. But then the process hit a snag, revealing a potential weakness in the system itself, the constitutional court appointment crisis.
Ah, yes. This gets legally intricate, but it's vital. The Constitutional Court needs a quorum of 7 justices to rule on an impeachment. But due to some recent retirements, 3 seats were vacant.
Leaving only 6 sitting justices.
Exactly, which meant legally they couldn't proceed with Yoon's impeachment trial. The whole process was stalled.
A perfect opportunity for obstruction if the person responsible for appointments wanted to block things.
And that's precisely what the acting president, former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, tried to do. Yoon was suspended, so Han stepped in, and he immediately announced he would not make the necessary appointments to fill the vacant seats selected by the National Assembly.
What was his justification for essentially paralyzing the court?
It was quite thin, legally. He claimed he was protecting the separation of powers, not wanting to influence the court's balance while the case was pending.
But legal experts disagreed.
Widely. The consensus among constitutional scholars was that the president, or acting president, has a duty, not a choice, to appoint the justices selected by the Assembly and the Chief Justice. By refusing, Han was deliberately creating gridlock.
And the political goal seemed obvious. Stall the impeachment indefinitely. Or, if the court somehow did rule with only 6, maybe hope for a tie or a single dissent, which could reinstate Yoon.
It looked like an attempt at a judicial veto through sheer inaction. The opposition saw it exactly that way, an illegal move to block the trial, and their response was equally dramatic, equally unprecedented.
They impeached Han, the acting president.
They impeached the acting president, yes. Passed the motion on December 27th. This threw up huge constitutional questions.
Like, what's the standard for impeaching an acting president? Is it the lower bar for a prime minister or the higher bar for a president?
That was the crux of the debate. Had Han, by temporarily assuming presidential duties, taken on the full constitutional status of the president, requiring a 2/3 majority for removal, or did he remain fundamentally the prime minister, removable by a simple majority?
And the assembly went with a simpler majority.
The speaker adopted the view that his core status was still prime minister, and the impeachment passed on that basis. It was navigating a constitutional minefield in real time, a very bold move to break the deadlock.
A necessary move, it sounds like.
It proved effective. The next acting president, who was the Minister of Economy and Finance, clearly saw the legal writing on the wall and felt the political heat. He quickly appointed 2 of the waiting justices.
Bringing the court up to 8 members.
Enough for a quorum. Enough to finally proceed and deliver a binding verdict.
Which brings us to that final legal decision. The Constitutional Court weighing in not just on Yoon, but on the strength of the whole system.
And on April 4th, 2025, they delivered. Unanimous, 8-0 to uphold the impeachment.
And they didn't mince words in the ruling.
Not at all. They found Yoon guilty of 5 distinct major illegal acts during that 6-hour window, actions that amounted to a fundamental assault on the constitutional order.
What were the key findings?
The ruling listed them clearly. Illegally declaring martial law in the first place, ordering the military to physically block lawmakers from doing their constitutional duty, and, maybe the most chilling, ordering the arrests of sitting judges and even Supreme Court justices.
Wow.
The court concluded these actions showed he had gravely betrayed the trust of the Korean people. It was only the second presidential removal by impeachment in South Korean history. A painful process, but ultimately proof that the ultimate legal safeguard worked.
The system held. The law won. Accountability was delivered. And yet, digging into the sources, you can't ignore the social fallout. The constitutional antibodies work, yes, but the patient seems more divided than ever. That tension between resilience and cohesion.
That's the deep paradox here, isn't it? The institutions did their job, neutralized the coup attempt, but the crisis itself acted like an accelerant on the pre-existing South-South conflict. Those deep splits along ideological, generational, even regional lines. The legal process immediately became a political battleground.
You can really see that difference compared to the 2017 impeachment of Park Geun-hye, right? The public reaction was much more polarized this time.
Much more. In 2017, there was broader consensus. Even some conservatives agreed Park had to go. This time, extremely rigid divisions. Overall support for Yoon's impeachment was 57% for, 37% against a significant minority opposed. But look deeper. Among self-identified conservatives, support for impeachment plummeted, from around 50% supporting Park's removal in 2017 down to just 22% supporting Yoon's removal in 2025.
That suggests partisan identity trumped constitutional concerns for many.
It seems so. The crisis was instantly framed by Yoon's supporters, not as a consequence of his actions, but as an ideological attack by the opposition.
And that framing taps into deeper historical narratives.
Yes, especially among older conservatives. There's often this loyalty, even nostalgia, for the Park Chung-hee era, the strong leader, the economic miracle narrative. For them, this wasn't just politics. It felt like an existential defense of national identity. The rhetoric became extreme. A war between communism and democracy. Completely unfounded claims about national security being compromised by the opposition.
That kind of framing can really damage faith in the institutions themselves, the courts, the legislature.
It absolutely can. And that polarization spilled over into actual violence. After Yoon's arrest warrant was issued, remember, pro-Yoon rioters stormed the Seoul Western District Court.
Right, trying to physically disrupt the legal process.
Exactly. Using violence, forcing their way in, causing damage, injuring police. That direct assault on the judiciary showed a frightening willingness among some to reject constitutional outcomes if they don't like them.
Beyond the domestic fractures, this kind of turmoil obviously has ripples internationally. South Korea's stability matters hugely in East Asia.
Immensely. Yoon's government had a very clear foreign policy. Hardline on North Korea, doubling down on the alliance with the U.S., closer ties with Japan.
Distinct shift.
A very distinct posture. The opposition generally favors a different path. More engagement with the North. A more, shall we say, balanced diplomatic approach in the region.
And they were critical of Yoon's policy towards China specifically.
Explicitly. They accused his government of antagonizing China, of sacrificing regional balance for the sake of the U.S. alliance. So, this domestic upheaval, having an interim government for months, it naturally raises questions abroad about the staying power of Yoon's foreign policy direction. Is there really a stable consensus behind it?
And all this instability comes at a tricky time economically, too.
Precisely. You have the ongoing U.S.-China trade tensions already squeezing Korea's export-driven economy. Navigating that requires a stable, unified government making long-term calls. This crisis, the impeachment, the subsequent election, it inevitably created uncertainty just when strategic clarity was needed most.
Okay, so we've walked through the 6 hours, the legal response, the social impact. Let's wrap up. What are the big takeaways from this, well, frankly, bruising but remarkable journey for South Korean democracy?
Well, first, you have to acknowledge the sheer efficiency of the recovery. The constitutional timeline was followed to the letter. The election happened exactly 60 days after the court's ruling, June 3rd, 2025.
No power vacuum. The system reset itself.
Exactly. It proved capable of processing accountability swiftly. And look at the voters' response.
That's a huge turnout.
79.38%, the highest since 1997. People didn't check out. They leaned in, they engaged intensely, which suggests the system's ability to handle the crisis actually reinforced democratic participation rather than undermining it.
So the core lesson seems to be about vigilance and structure.
I think so. This deep dive really underscores that democracy isn't something you achieve and then put on a shelf. It demands constant, active work. And South Korea's experience shows that having specific, enforceable constitutional tools like that must-comply clause in Article 77, combined with a population that has a deep, almost instinctual civic memory of fighting authoritarianism. Those are the essential antibodies in today's world, where democracy often feels like it's backsliding.
The institutions held, the law prevailed, the process worked remarkably fast. A potential blueprint for surviving a modern coup attempt.
It is definitely a powerful story of institutional survival, yes. The structure held, the immediate threat was contained, proving the democratic framework itself is sound. But, and this is the crucial, however, the crisis undeniably deepened the political polarization. It risked eroding that fundamental respect for the Constitution, not just as law, but as the agreed-upon rules for living together despite differences. Which leads to, I think, the final, maybe more troubling thought. It suggests that the ultimate test for a democracy isn't just surviving a coup attempt, which South Korea did masterfully here. The longer, harder test might be whether it can then heal the underlying social divisions that made such an attempt seem possible, even necessary to some in the first place. That healing, that's the work still ahead.